So as you go through and you're looking at the words that you're using for meaning, you also want to be careful about the inevitability of what you're expressing. Call this absolute language, that you should or must or does, anything that seems to say that if you put in X, Y will come out every time. There's no nuance to it. In most cases, that's really hard to accurately say. There are, a few things like God loves us. That's an absolute statement that you can say with confidence. But if you want to say that if I set my alarm for 9 o'clock, I will get up at 9 o'clock. Most of the time that may be right, but there may be exceptions. Maybe you're sick one day, and to say that you will always do that is inaccurate. This gets it's really important in psychology because there is so much nuance in our field. In order to make a causal claim, you'll learn this in 310, you have to have three things. One is you have to know that it's called temporal precedence. A comes before B, so whatever the cause is comes before the effect. You have to know that there's nothing else in between, so there may be A plus B equals C, but you may think that just A causes C. So you have to know that there's nothing else influencing the outcome that you're talking about. And the third thing, so you have temporal precedence, no other explanation, and then, oh man, I'm blanking. I can't remember it right now. Sorry, it's not on my note. But there are some very specific things you need in order to make causal claims. And that's why they're not made a lot in psychology, because there is so much we don't understand and there's so much nuance to it. You can see the effects that this has when people use language that may be construed in causal ways. The media loves to do this. Most of the time, psychologists in their papers are really good about saying, this may have a connection or there may be a relationship, instead of saying there is a relationship. Even if there is some kind of relationship between two things, by saying that there may be a relationship, you're still giving yourself an out to say, like, we thought these things were connected, but there's actually a third factor that is more connected and actually causes, or is the thing that's causing this effect. If you think about autism and the vaccine sort of issue that has come up in the last several years, there was a scientist who did research. It was bad research, and it got published, and then the media took it and ran, and now we have lots of people, albeit the minority, there are people who don't want to vaccinate their kids because of this research, even though the research is wrong. So it's really hard to illegitimize that research and the things that people are saying because they've already got it in their heads. So we always want to be careful in our writing to minimize or downplay the direct causal connection between two factors, or a cause and an effect. Because if you write a paper and you find a connection and it gets published, you want to make sure that the media is always going to distort things, and so if they take your study, you want to make sure that whatever fault there is, it's not yours, that it's the media. That in your paper you say there may be a connection, there may be other factors that we haven't controlled for, because if the media gets a hold of it, it's going to be very public. Lots of people are going to be reading the paper. Lots of psychologists, people who know what they're talking about, are going to read, and they're going to say, okay, the media is just taking this and running with it, and they're being really inaccurate, and then they're going to say something to somebody is going to be on the news and say, the paper actually says this, and the media is saying that it actually says this, but they're wrong. And while there may be some negative consequences from that, hopefully by being careful in the language that we use, you can mitigate that or minimize the amount of effect that can have on people. Because in the case of this autism and vaccines, people are getting sick with easily preventable diseases that are affecting their health, their lifestyle, and it's going to affect other people's lives and lifestyle. So there's some really important consequences that we want to avoid when we write. Now, obviously, this is 307. It's just this is how you're learning how to write. So I don't expect you to be writing papers that are going to cause worldwide issues. But as you're learning to write, it's important to recognize the use of absolute language and mitigating the statements that you're going to make, using words like may, there may be a relationship, or there's a possibility. You always want to try and suggest not only what you actually mean, but you want to make it sound like this is what I think, but this is a theory, and there's I'm okay if somebody else comes along and disproves me. If you make it sound like there's no other explanation, then it's absolute language, and you want to avoid that because, like I said earlier, there is so much nuance to everything in general. Another example of absolute language that comes to mind is in my psychology of gender class. In the textbook we're reading about sexism, and the authors talk about how hostile sexism is correlated with benevolent sexism. So people who are hostile sexism is sort of the sexism that we all know, where you think that women can't do something or that men can't do something. Benevolent sexism is even things like opening the door for women. That's benevolent sexism, because I don't really understand it, but in the textbook they talk about how bad sexism, this hostile sexism, is correlated with beneficial sexism, benevolent sexism, sorry. But then, in this textbook that thousands of people read, they say that they are highly correlated with giving lighter sentences to rapists, which is a really powerful statement, considering that they said that it is correlated. So the way I took it and the way I understood it and the way a lot of the people in the class read it was, if you open doors for anybody, especially women, then you're also more likely to to not be as harsh on a rapist, which is a really strong statement and really inaccurate, because I think, particularly at BYU, there are a lot of people who are, trying to just be chivalrous and open doors for people and just be nice. And to say that we'd also be nicer to rapists is a really inaccurate statement, I think. And so you can see how most of the time it doesn't happen, but when it does, it can be really inflammatory, and it can say things that aren't true and are really hard to... Now, that one experience with the textbook makes me a lot more cautious about believing the things that they're going to express in the book, because what else are they going to say or imply that's not actually true? So you want to be careful with the language that you use, and if you find yourself using absolute language, try and tone it back, add a couple words that imply that there are other reasons that may influence this, and that'll really help in your career, just in general, in writing and psychology, because there's a lot of it.